There is a moment in life when everything around you feels strangely familiar, yet completely different at the same time. Not because the world changed overnight, but because you did. And what feels like confusion right now might actually be the beginning of something quietly powerful coming together in your life in ways you cannot fully see yet. Stay with this, because if you've been feeling a shift inside yourself, a pull towards something you can't explain, this message will make sense in a way words rarely do. There are phases in life where old patterns stop feeling natural. Things you once chased start to lose meaning. Conversations feel surface level. Even people you once felt close to start feeling emotionally distant. And at first, you think something is wrong. But what if nothing is wrong? What if you are simply outgrowing the version of yourself that used to fit in that world? There is a quiet kind of transformation that doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't come with clarity in the beginning. It starts as discomfort, as questions, as a sense that you are no longer fully aligned with the life you used to accept without thinking. And in that space, something important begins to form. You start observing more than reacting. You start thinking more deeply before speaking. You start noticing patterns in yourself you used to ignore. And slowly, almost invisibly, your awareness expands. This is not a dramatic transformation at first. It is subtle, almost unnoticeable. But internally, everything is shifting. There are people who go through life repeating the same emotional cycles over and over again. And then there are moments when something interrupts that cycle. A realization, a silence that feels louder than noise, a feeling that says, there is more to me than this. And once that thought appears, even once, you cannot fully unsee it. You begin questioning your habits, your choices, your reactions, not from judgment, but from awareness. And that awareness changes everything. Because when you become aware, you can no longer live unconsciously in the same way. You start seeing your old self as something you are slowly stepping out of, not something you are trapped inside. And this is where many people feel a strange mix of emotions. You may feel growth, but also loneliness. You may feel clarity, but also confusion. You may feel stronger, but also disconnected from what once felt normal. This is not a contradiction. This is transition. There are moments in this process where you may feel like life is pulling things away from you. Old interests fade. Certain environments no longer feel comfortable. Some relationships feel harder to maintain than before. And instead of forcing everything to stay the same, something inside you begins to let go. Not because you are giving up, but because you are no longer the same person who needed those things in the same way. And what replaces that space is not emptiness. It is awareness. You begin to understand yourself in ways you never did before. You notice what drains you. You notice what strengthens you. You notice what feels authentic and what feels like performance. And slowly, without force, you begin adjusting. Not toward perfection, but toward truth. There is a deep psychological shift that happens when a person starts becoming more self-aware. You stop living purely on autopilot. You start responding instead of reacting. You begin to see that many of your past decisions were shaped by fear, approval, or habit, not alignment. And once you see that, your relationship with life changes. You no longer just ask, "What should I do?" You start asking, "What feels right for who I am becoming?" And that question alone begins to reshape your direction. But transformation is not always comfortable. Growth rarely feels like certainty. It often feels like standing in between two versions of yourself. One version is familiar, safe, predictable, even if it no longer fits. The other version is unfamiliar, unstable, still forming, but more aligned with who you are becoming. And in that in-between space, life can feel uncertain. But this is where real internal change happens. Not in the moments where everything is clear, but in the moments where you continue anyway without full clarity. Over time, something interesting begins to happen. You start noticing that things begin aligning differently. Not in a magical or guaranteed way, but in a practical, grounded sense. You make better decisions because your awareness is sharper. You avoid situations that no longer serve your mental peace. You attract different conversations because your energy and priorities shift. And what once felt chaotic slowly starts feeling more intentional. It can feel surprising when you look back and realize how much has changed internally, even if external life changed gradually. You start to understand that the real transformation was never outside of you. It was the shift in how you see, interpret, and respond to life. There may still be days where you question yourself, where you wonder if you are overthinking everything, where you feel like you are between who you were and who you are becoming. But even that questioning is part of awareness, because a mind that is growing does not settle for unconscious repetition. It questions, it observes, it refines, and through that process, clarity slowly builds. Not all at once, but piece by piece. And one day, you look at your life and realize something quietly powerful. Things have been coming together, not in the way you expected, but in the way that reflects your inner change. Not because life suddenly became perfect, but because you became more aligned with what you allow into it. And that realization can feel deeply grounding, because it shifts your focus away from waiting and toward becoming. Becoming more aware, more intentional, more honest with yourself. This is what inner awakening often looks like in real life. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady, personal, and deeply transformative in ways that are hard to explain but easy to feel. If you are in this phase right now, there is nothing to fix about you. You are not behind. You are not lost. You are in motion internally, even if life around you feels still. And sometimes, that internal movement is the most important kind, because it shapes everything that follows. So instead of rushing to understand every detail of what is happening in your life, allow yourself to observe it, to notice your thoughts, to question your patterns, to listen to what feels aligned and what doesn't. Growth does not always need force. Sometimes it only needs awareness and patience with yourself as you evolve. Whatever is unfolding for you right now is not random in the sense that it is meaningless. It is part of your experience, shaping your perspective, refining your awareness, and guiding you toward a deeper understanding of yourself. And in time, when things settle, you may look back and realize something simple but powerful. It was not everything around you that suddenly changed. It was you. And that change is what quietly brought everything else into a new alignment. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on where you are in your own journey right now. Not where you think you should be, but where you actually are, and what you are becoming through it. Stay present with your growth. Stay honest with your awareness. And keep moving forward, even if the path is still forming. This is your return to awakening. If you feel connected to this message, like the video, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to continue this journey of awareness, reflection, and inner transformation. And there is something you may not have noticed yet, but it has been happening quietly in the background of your life. Your tolerance for anything that feels false is lowering. Not in a dramatic way, but subtly. You no longer find comfort in things that once distracted you for hours. You don't engage with conversations that feel empty the same way you used to. Even your own thoughts are becoming harder to ignore when they don't feel aligned. It is almost as if your inner world is becoming more honest, whether you are ready for it or not. And this honesty can feel uncomfortable at first, because it removes noise. And when the noise fades, you are left with yourself. There is a strange moment many people go through during this kind of shift. You sit in silence and realize you can no longer fully return to who you used to be. Not because you are trying to change, but because something inside you has already changed. And this creates a quiet tension between the life you lived on autopilot and the life you are now starting to see differently. You may even find yourself reflecting more on the past, not with regret, but with a kind of distant understanding, as if you are looking at an older version of yourself with compassion instead of judgment. And that shift alone is powerful, because most people never reach a point where they can observe their past self without becoming trapped in it. But you are starting to see it as part of your evolution, not your identity. There is also something else that begins to happen during this stage. You become more selective with your energy. You stop explaining yourself as much. You stop trying to convince people who are not interested in understanding you. Not out of ego, but out of clarity. Because you begin to realize that not every space deserves your presence, and not every opinion deserves your attention. And this is where your inner strength quietly grows. Not in loud moments, but in boundaries no one sees. In decisions no one applauds. In choices that protect your peace even when no one notices. And over time, something starts to stabilize within you. Even if life externally still feels uncertain, there is a grounding that begins to form in your awareness. You start trusting your inner signals more than external noise. You begin noticing that your intuition is not random. It is informed by experience, reflection, and emotional intelligence that you are slowly developing. And the more you listen to it, the clearer it becomes. Not because life gets easier, but because you become more aligned with yourself. There may still be moments where doubt enters, where you question your direction, where you wonder if you are overanalyzing your own transformation. But even those moments serve a purpose. They keep you aware. They prevent you from becoming unconscious again. Because awareness is not a destination. It is something you return to again and again. And in that return, you grow. You may notice that certain emotional reactions no longer control you the way they used to. Situations that once triggered strong responses now feel more manageable. Not because life changed, but because your internal response is evolving. This is one of the clearest signs of inner transformation. When the same external world no longer produces the same internal chaos. And slowly, without forcing it, you begin responding from a calmer, more grounded place. There is also a deeper realization that begins to form during this process. That not everything in life needs to be solved immediately. Some things need to be understood over time. Some answers come through experience, not urgency. And this patience with life becomes a quiet strength within you. You stop rushing your own becoming. You start allowing space for your thoughts to mature, for your emotions to settle, for your perspective to expand naturally. And in that space, something subtle but important takes place. You begin to trust timing more than pressure. You begin to understand that clarity often arrives after reflection, not before it. And this changes how you move through your decisions. You are no longer reacting from urgency alone. You are observing, processing, choosing more intentionally. And even though this process may feel slow at times, It is building something solid within you, something that cannot be easily shaken by external circumstances. There will still be days where you feel like you are not progressing fast enough. But growth is rarely visible in the moment it is happening. It becomes visible when you look back and realize you no longer think, react, or feel the same way you used to. That is when you understand how far you have actually come. And in the middle of all of this, something quietly important is forming. A stronger sense of self. Not defined by approval. Not shaped by comparison. But grounded in awareness of who you are becoming beneath everything external. And that kind of inner foundation does not collapse easily. It evolves. It deepens. It stabilizes you in ways you may not fully recognize yet, but will come to understand with time. And even now, as you go through this phase of reflection and change, there is a deeper invitation within it all. To observe yourself honestly. To listen without resistance. To grow without forcing speed onto your journey. Because what is unfolding is not just a phase of thinking differently. It is a shift in how you relate to yourself and your life as a whole. And that shift, once it begins, does not truly stop. It continues quietly, layer by layer, moment by moment. And what becomes even more interesting is how your perception of time begins to shift. Days may still look the same from the outside, but something inside you starts noticing them differently. You are no longer just moving through time. You are observing it, reflecting within it, learning from it. And this subtle awareness changes the way you experience even ordinary moments. Simple situations begin to feel more meaningful when you are present in them. A quiet walk, a moment of silence, a thought that passes through your mind without resistance. These small things start carrying weight they never carried before. Not because they changed, but because you changed the way you are present with them. And in this presence, something powerful starts developing. Clarity. Not the kind that arrives all at once like a sudden answer, but the kind that builds slowly through observation, through understanding your patterns, through recognizing what consistently drains you and what consistently strengthens you. And over time, you begin making adjustments without even realizing it. Small shifts, subtle decisions, quiet changes in direction. And these small changes begin shaping a completely different trajectory in your life. There is also a deeper emotional layer that comes with this stage of awareness. You may find yourself revisiting memories, not to relive them, but to understand them differently. Situations that once felt confusing begin to make more sense when seen through your current awareness. You realize that many of your past reactions were not who you truly are, but responses shaped by what you understood at that time. And this realization brings a strange kind of peace, because it removes self-judgment. It replaces confusion with understanding, and it allows you to see your journey as a process of learning rather than a series of mistakes. This is where self-compassion begins to grow, not as an idea, but as an experience. You start giving yourself the same understanding you once searched for from others. And that shift alone changes your internal world significantly. There is also something important happening beneath your awareness. Your values are changing, not in a forced or dramatic way, but naturally through experience. What once felt important may now feel less significant. What you once ignored may now feel essential. And this reordering of priorities is not confusion. It is alignment. It is your internal compass recalibrating itself based on who you are becoming, not who you used to be. And this can feel unsettling at times, because change always challenges familiarity. But familiarity is not always truth. Sometimes it is just repetition. And when you begin stepping outside of repetition, even slightly, you begin to see life differently. You start questioning not only what you do, but why you do it. And that question alone can open doors of awareness that were previously closed. There is also a quiet strength that begins forming in your ability to sit with uncertainty. You are no longer as quick to escape uncomfortable thoughts. You are learning to observe them, to let them exist without letting them define you. And this creates emotional resilience in a very grounded way. Not by avoiding discomfort, but by understanding it. And through that understanding, its control over you slowly decreases. You begin to realize that not every thought deserves action. Not every emotion requires a reaction. Not every feeling defines reality. And this separation between awareness and reaction becomes one of the most important inner skills you develop. Because it gives you space. Space to choose. Space to reflect. Space to respond with intention rather than impulse. And within that space, you begin to experience life differently. Less reactive. More conscious. More present with what is actually happening rather than what your mind is projecting. And slowly, you start noticing a pattern. Even when things feel uncertain externally, your internal world is becoming more organized, more stable, more aware. And this internal shift begins influencing how you navigate everything else. Your decisions become quieter but clearer. Your direction becomes less chaotic but more intentional. And even your doubts start feeling less overwhelming because you are learning how to observe them instead of being consumed by them. There is a point in this process where you may realize something subtle but profound. You are not becoming someone entirely different. You are becoming more aware of who you already are beneath conditioning, habit, and repetition. And that awareness changes everything about how you move forward. But even here, the process continues. And as this awareness deepens, something unexpected begins to happen in your relationship with expectations. You start expecting less from outcomes and understanding more from experiences. Not because you have stopped caring, but because you are no longer attaching your sense of stability to results alone. There is a quiet shift from control to understanding, from forcing outcomes to observing processes. And this shift does not make you passive. It makes you more grounded, more deliberate, more aware of where your energy actually matters. You begin to notice that much of your past stress came not from life itself, but from resistance to how life unfolds. And when that resistance softens, even slightly, your internal experience changes. Situations feel less overwhelming. Decisions feel less urgent. Thoughts feel less chaotic. Not because life became simpler, but because your relationship with it is becoming clearer. There is also a phase in this journey where solitude starts to feel different. At first, it may feel like distance from others. But gradually, it transforms into space for reflection. A space where your thoughts are no longer interrupted by external noise. And in that space, you begin hearing yourself more clearly. Not just thoughts, but patterns, emotions, subtle inner responses that were always there, but previously overlooked. And this awareness slowly reshapes how you understand yourself. You start realizing that many of your reactions were shaped by habit, not truth. And many of your fears were amplified by repetition, not reality. This realization doesn't erase challenges, but it changes how you interpret them. And interpretation is powerful because it determines whether an experience becomes confusion or clarity. There is also something that begins to dissolve during this phase. The need to constantly prove your direction to others. You become less concerned with explaining your inner process, not because you are closing off, but because you are becoming more comfortable with your own understanding, even when others don't see it yet. And that comfort creates emotional independence. You are no longer seeking constant validation to feel certain about your growth. You begin to trust your own reflection of yourself more than external opinions. And that is a significant shift in inner maturity. There are still moments where old patterns try to return. Old thoughts, old emotional responses, old ways of interpreting situations. But instead of automatically following them, you begin noticing them first. And that moment of noticing creates distance, a space between stimulus and reaction. And in that space, choice becomes possible. You don't always choose perfectly, but you choose more consciously. And that is where change actually begins. Not in perfection, but in awareness before action. And over time, this practice starts to shape your emotional landscape. You become less reactive to things that once controlled your mood easily. You recover faster from emotional fluctuations. You observe rather than spiral. And slowly, stability becomes something internal rather than dependent on external conditions. There is also a deeper understanding forming beneath all of this. That growth is not about eliminating difficulty. It is about developing clarity within difficulty. And this clarity allows you to move through challenges without losing yourself inside them. You begin to understand that confusion is not failure. It is part of processing something new. And discomfort is not a sign of wrong direction. It is often a sign of transition. This reframing changes how you treat your own experiences. You become less harsh with yourself, less impatient with your progress, more willing to allow time to reveal what immediate thinking cannot. And in this patience, something steady begins to form. A quieter confidence, not loud, not forced, but grounded in the understanding that you are evolving through what you are experiencing. Even when it feels uncertain, even when it feels slow, even when it feels incomplete, there is a growing awareness that everything you are going through is contributing to something you cannot fully see yet. Not in a guaranteed or fixed outcome sense, but in the sense that experience is shaping perception, and perception shapes direction. And as this continues, life does not necessarily become easier, but you become more capable of moving through it with awareness instead of resistance. And that alone changes everything about how you live it. And somewhere within this ongoing shift, you begin to notice something even more subtle. Your relationship with silence itself is changing. Silence is no longer uncomfortable in the way it once might have been. It is no longer something to fill immediately. Instead, it becomes a space where clarity slowly rises on its own. A space where your thoughts settle instead of scatter. And in that settling, you begin to hear a different kind of understanding forming within you. Not loud, not forced, just present. And this presence starts to reveal patterns you were too busy to notice before. How quickly your mind used to jump to conclusions. How often you used to react before fully understanding. How many emotions pass through you without being truly observed. And now, even if only partially, you are beginning to see them as they happen. This kind of awareness does not erase human nature. It refines your experience of it. You still feel. You still react at times. But you also notice. And that noticing is powerful, because it creates space where automatic behavior once existed. There is also a growing realization that not everything requires immediate meaning. Some experiences are meant to be observed before they are understood. And some understanding only arrives after distance, not during intensity. This shifts the way you engage with your own life. You become less desperate to label everything instantly. less pressured to define every emotion in the moment it appears. And in that ease, something softer begins to emerge within your mindset. Patience with your own process. Not forced patience, but understanding-based patience. The kind that comes from recognizing that growth has its own rhythm. And it does not always match urgency. There may still be moments where you question your direction, where you wonder if you are overanalyzing your thoughts or experiences. But even those questions begin to feel different. Less like confusion, more like reflection. Less like fear, more like curiosity. And that shift in tone matters more than it seems, because it changes how you treat your inner world. You stop fighting your thoughts as enemies. You start observing them as signals. Not all of them accurate, not all of them meaningful, but all of them part of your mental landscape. And through this observation, you begin separating identity from thought. You realize you are not every thought you think. You are the one aware of them. And that awareness creates distance. A healthy distance. A space where you are no longer fully merged with every mental fluctuation. And in that space, something stabilizing begins to form. A sense of inner grounding that is not dependent on external validation or constant clarity. Just awareness. Simple, present, steady. There is also a shift happening in how you respond to your past. Things you once carried emotionally may start feeling lighter when viewed through your current understanding. Not because the past changed, but because your perception of it did. And this reperception brings relief in unexpected ways. You begin to understand that your past self was operating with the awareness they had at that time. And this understanding reduces internal resistance. Less self-judgment, less internal conflict, more acceptance of your journey as a sequence of learning, not a collection of fixed mistakes. And this acceptance does something subtle but important. It frees mental space. Space that was once occupied by regret, overthinking, or unresolved interpretation. And that space slowly becomes available for new awareness, new thinking, new emotional clarity. There is also something quietly important developing beneath the surface of all this. Your sense of direction is becoming less dependent on external comparison. You are no longer measuring your life against imagined timelines or others' visible progress. Instead, you are beginning to sense your own rhythm, your own pace, your own unfolding process. And even if you don't fully trust it yet, you are beginning to notice it. And noticing is always the first step toward alignment. Because awareness leads to understanding. And understanding leads to grounded action. Not rushed, not forced, but intentional. And as this continues, you may begin to realize something simple but profound. That much of what you were searching for externally was actually clarity within. And that clarity was never far away. It was just buried beneath noise, repetition, and unobserved thought patterns. And now, slowly, layer by layer, that noise is beginning to quiet. And as the noise begins to quiet, something very subtle but powerful starts to emerge in how you experience everyday life. You start noticing moments that you used to overlook completely. The way your mind reacts before your awareness catches up. The small emotional shifts that pass through you during the day. The difference between what you feel and what you assume you feel. And this gap between feeling and interpretation becomes more visible to you. Not as confusion, but as understanding. You begin to realize that much of your inner tension was not coming from life itself, but from the way life was being interpreted in real time. And that realization alone starts to soften something inside you. There is also a shift happening in how you relate to control. You may notice that your need to control every outcome is slowly decreasing. Not because you no longer care about your direction, but because you are starting to see how limited control actually is. Life is too dynamic to be fully controlled. And the more you try to force certainty, the more mental pressure it creates. So instead, you begin to move differently. More awareness, less forcing, more observation, less resistance. And in that balance, something steadier begins to form within your mindset. You are no longer trying to predict every step ahead. You are learning to respond to the step you are currently on. And this shift changes your internal experience of pressure. There is also a quiet emotional transformation happening in how you handle setbacks. Things that once felt like full stops now feel more like pauses. Moments of reflection instead of collapse. And this change does not come from ignoring difficulty. It comes from understanding that difficulty is not the end of the process. It is part of it. And that understanding creates emotional flexibility. You are no longer breaking internally every time something does not go as expected. Instead, you are adjusting, reevaluating, continuing, even if slowly, even if imperfectly. There is also something changing in your inner dialogue. The way you speak to yourself internally is becoming more important to you. You start noticing when your thoughts become harsh or unnecessarily critical. And instead of automatically believing them, you begin questioning them. Is this thought accurate? Is this interpretation fair? Is there another way to understand this moment? And even asking these questions begins to create distance from self-judgment. Not by eliminating it completely, but by weakening its automatic control. And slowly, this creates a more balanced internal voice. One that is not purely critical, not purely idealistic, but more grounded in observation and honesty. There is also a growing awareness of how much energy you used to spend on things that no longer feel relevant to who you are becoming. Old habits, old mental loops, old emotional reactions that no longer match your current awareness. And as you recognize this, you naturally begin to withdraw energy from them. Not through force, but through disinterest. And that disinterest is a powerful form of change. Because what you no longer feed begins to fade. And what you consistently pay attention to begins to grow. So your attention itself becomes a form of direction. A quiet shaping force in your inner world. There may still be moments where you feel like you are in between versions of yourself. Not fully who you were. Not fully who you are becoming. And that space can feel uncertain at times. But it is also where integration happens. Where understanding deepens. Where internal alignment slowly takes shape without pressure. And in that space, even confusion begins to transform. From something overwhelming into something informative. Something that tells you where attention is still needed. Where awareness is still developing. Where understanding is still forming. And as you continue moving through this phase, you may begin to realize something important. You are not simply going through changes. You are learning how to observe change itself. And that ability reshapes everything about how you relate to your inner and outer world.